officer candidate school to be a pilot in the Navy right after college.
And what was aviation school like?
It was a good experience. Aviation Officer Candidate School. I don't know if you saw the movie An Officer and a Gentleman, but it was based on the AOCS, and that was, of course, the Hollywood version. But it was about 90 days long, and about 50% of the class made it through at all, and there were 12 of us out of about 65 that actually graduated on time. And then following AOCS, I went to flight school. Started with primary flight school, and then in the Navy, regardless of what aircraft you're going to fly, eventually you go through primary flight school, find fixed wing aircraft. And when I went through, it was the T-34 Charlie, and after 6 months, then you find out what type of platform you're going to fly in the Navy, and for me that was helicopters. So flight school was about a year and a half. Stressful, but great experience.
Why did you join the service?
To be a pilot. I wanted to be a pilot. I'd been planning on going in the Peace Corps from the time I was in 9th grade, and then I got stopped by a recruiter walking through the student center at Virginia Tech one day, and being polite, I listened to him. This was back in 1986. My degree was civil engineering. I thought that would be good for the Peace Corps. I still want to go in the Peace Corps, by the way. And he asked me finally, because I wasn't showing a lot of interest, if I could be anything that I wanted to be in the Navy, what would it be? And I flippantly told him pilot, because that was 1986, and I did not think women were allowed to go into the Navy, the military, as pilots. And he said, oh, well, here's what you need to do. And to me, that was about the same as being offered the opportunity, being an Olympic athlete. It just wasn't something you turned down. So I went through the process, applied, and here I am, 25 years later.
Similar. Why did you choose the branch that you chose?
Maybe? Good question. At that time, for some reason, naval aviation seemed to me to be, I was going to be in the military and a pilot. I wanted to be a Navy pilot. My father had been in the Navy for 2 years during Korea, and so I'd heard a lot of his stories from the Navy. So it also offered, I thought at that time, the best career opportunity for me.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Oh, sure. Day one? Oh, absolutely. That was at Aviation Officer Candidate School. Yes. Yes, you get inducted as a, show up as a civilian. You have about a 24-hour window, something like that, to report. And I waited till the last moment to report, and you're greeted by officer candidates who are AOCS candidates, but they're in their 14th week, so they're about to graduate. They've been through the program, and you're with them for, I forgot now how long, but maybe a couple of days, and they in-dock you and kind of show you the ropes a little bit and yell at you. And then you meet the drill instructors, and you meet them at 0500 in the morning. They come down and throw the trash cans down the halls and yell, and you have to run out in the hall, and they yell and scream at you, and that continues for a number of weeks. So, but they don't have AOCS anymore. They closed it. Now it's up in Newport, Rhode Island. They've combined OCS and AOCS.
And I missed this one. Where were you living when you joined the service?
I was in college, Virginia Tech, Blacksburg, Virginia.
And what did it feel like for you those first days?
Shock, culture shock. But I had done a lot of, I was in the delayed entry program, so I was sworn in over a year before I went down to AOCS. So between being sworn in and going, I had done a lot of independent research. I went to the Navy. There's an ROTC unit at Virginia Tech, and so I went, talked to those folks. I audited some Navy ROTC classes. I knew AOCS was going to be physically demanding, and the Marine Corps ROTC unit they worked out every morning 2 hours, 5 days a week. And so I talked to the gunny sergeant, kind of explained going to the Navy, can I join you guys? And yep, I was welcome to join them. So I worked out every morning, and I knew it was going to be difficult, maybe especially difficult, I felt, as a female at the time. And at the end of the year, I had a better attendance record than any of the Marines for whom the training morning PT was mandatory. But that was a great help to me to have been able to afford that opportunity.
You were really.
I wanted to make it through, and I knew that was going to be challenging. So, yeah, that helped quite a bit.
Tell me about your training experiences.
Which ones?
I guess
ASCS, flight school,
we'll just the first ones and then
ASCS, gosh. That was a, you know, you're met by the drill instructors, and it seems, you know, they set it up, it's very intense. The idea is, I think, if you're going to quit now. Don't quit, you know, when you're flying an airplane at 10,000 feet, so 30,000 feet. But anyway, it's, you know, you have a drill instructor in your face pretty much. You're allowed 8 hours of sleep a night, and other than that, you're with the drill instructor. It's regimented, and you can do nothing right. They have room lock RLP inspections every so often, where you know, you have to have your sheets, your bed made exactly so, everything folded exactly so. It's attention to detail, and that's something that carries with you, attention to detail, and that's what they're trying to get across. And you know, at the time, it's in the form of measuring your T-shirt when it's folded, or so they would come in, inspect, yell, rip everything apart, and then you're PTing. You know, you're on the ground doing push-ups. You're in the rain. You have fire ants biting your hands, the whole deal. But you know, the idea, everything they do is for a reason. They were tough but fair, absolutely. So, and I did not have, you know, as a woman, there was actually 4 of us in our class. We started with 60-some candidates, 4 women, which at that time was the largest class of women they'd ever had. And in the year that I went, they'd only took, what I was told was, they accepted 4 women into AOCS that year. So, and of the 4 of us, 2 of us graduated on time. 1 ended up rupturing an eardrum during jumping off the swim platform into the water, and another gal got dropped back 1 class, but ended up finishing. You know, it's a lifetime of anecdotes going through AOCS during one of these room locker inspections. You address the drill instructor a certain way, and you never call him you. It's always Master Gunnery Sergeant, you know, whatever, Master Gunnery Sergeant Norbeck, United States Marine Corps. And apparently one of the candidates had addressed him as you. So here comes the drill instructor. We're standing at attention, getting yelled at by a different drill instructor. We had 2 at that time. And our normal drill instructor walks by with one of the candidate officers right behind him doing hop and pops. But you as a female sheep, or you as a female sheep. And it's all you can do to not laugh that I went through 4 years of college for this, you know. Oh, they are. Drill instructors have a very, very good sense of humor.
And after that training, you said you had OCS?
Flight school.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was aviation officer candidate school, because at that time they separated if you were going to be, if you were coming in the Navy, to be a pilot, a flight officer, an aviation maintenance duty officer, I believe, or I'm not sure about AMDO, but also aviation intelligence. You went together through AOCS, right, down in Pensacola, Florida. Whereas the OCS, which was for if you went to colleges as civilian, not ROTC, and you wanted to go into the Navy, other than aviation, you go to OCS.
your instructors?
Oh, sure. Staff Sergeant Norbeck, United States Marine Corps. Oh, yeah. I remember him. I'll never forget him. How could
Good
you?
or bad impression?
Oh, good. Absolutely good. Yeah. Tough but fair.
And how did you get through it? How did you?
My mindset, like I said, I had talked to a lot of people, read a lot of books. I knew they couldn't make me quit, and I knew that they couldn't. They can't. There's limits to what they can do, and it's all psychological, pretty much. I mean, they push you PT, but you're pushing yourself also. You go as hard as you can, and but I knew that if I didn't get injured, they couldn't make me quit. So, and also keeping the goal in sight, thinking about finishing. And I got a really good piece of advice from somebody who'd gone through ASCS, and it was don't let your short-term desires outweigh your long-term goals. That was one, and the other was, if you think you want to quit, decide, I'm going to quit, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. So, yeah. And also, there's a lot of camaraderie. I mean, everybody's pulling together, and that's something else that you get in training early on. Is you're as strong as the weakest link. So I mean, everybody, and you may not be the best belt buckle polisher there is, but maybe you're good at squaring your corners or making your bed. So everybody work together. So.
And from there, where did you go next?
Flight school. I went to flight school. ASCS was in Pensacola, Florida, and then for me, actually for all of us, primary was at Whiting Field in Milton, Florida, for 6 months of primary training at T-34. And then you learn, most of us, like myself, had never flown an airplane before. So it's from day one of flight training. We had, as I recall, 4 weeks of ground school, and then you start your flight training. And you have 12 flights leading up to your first solo, and that's where you learn everything about the aircraft systems, emergency procedures, all that leading up to your solo. And in ground school before that, you learn the basics, talking to the tower, weather, a little bit about instrumentation.
And what was that training like for you? How did you think about it?
That was great. I mean, after ACS. That was good. I really enjoyed it. I had an engineering degree in college, so it wasn't particularly demanding, but it was good. Very enjoyable.
And no more throwing garbage.
No more throwing garbage cans, that's right. Yeah.
And your first solo?
Oh, I don't think I slept the night before that. But, yeah, that was, I remember that day as well. You taxiing out and taking off and just realizing there's no instructor on the back. I'm at your 13th flight. But, yeah, it was fun. We went out and, I forgot now really where I went. But, yeah, and then coming back in and landing by yourself. And there's procedures that you go through, checklists. And typically as a student with the instructor in the back, you're talking to the instructor, telling them what you're doing. And so I just told myself, I talked to myself, just like I'd done for the 12 flights before. So that was great. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And then from flight school, where did you go?
Well, after primary, then you go through the instrument phase of training. So, and that's intermediate training. So, primary, intermediate, finished that, and that was, I don't know how long that was, 6, 9 months, probably 9 months by the end of that. Then I selected helicopters, so I stayed there at Whiting Field and did another 6 months of what's called advanced training, and that was 6 months of helicopter training. And day one, when I went through, we flew the, I don't know, maybe it's the same helicopter now, but the TH-57, and you start out in the Bravo, and the Bravo doesn't have any kind of, it's, when you're holding it in a hover, it's just you. There's no added stabilization. And the first thing instructors like to do, there's a big field, and there's squares, gigantic squares. So the instructor flies perfectly, lands in the middle of the square, holds a perfect hover. This is your first flight in a helicopter, perfect hover. Say, okay, I want you to keep it in the square. Okay, you have controls. Roger, I have controls. You have controls. And the student takes it. So you have these squares all over the field, all these little helicopters. And when the student's at the control, I mean, immediately, going. I mean, I would have been happy if I could have kept it in Pensacola. But they do that for effect. But yeah, learn to fly helicopter. I loved that. I thoroughly enjoyed that. But when I was in high school, my father had given me a book to read called Chicken Hawk, which was written by Robert Mason, who's a Vietnam era pilot. He flew slicks in the Vietnam War. And I had remembered that. He talked about going through flight training and what that was like. So when I went in the Navy, I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. So it was a lot of fun to be able to experience that. But it's like riding a bike. It's like riding a bike. You know, when you first get on, you think it's really hard, and maybe you'll be the one kid that doesn't learn to ride the bike, but you do. You will.
By the end of that training, do they have you do the squares?
Oh yes, you can do it then. Oh, sure.
For your own satisfaction.
Right.
Okay, and then where did you go after that?
Okay, well at that point, when you graduate advanced training, you get your wings, pilot wings, and then you have a selection, your wish list, dream sheet, what do you want to fly in the Navy? And at that time, it was very limited. It was open to women, so H-46s was the only helicopter community at that time where women were fully integrated. We deployed with the squadron. There was H-3s at the time. They would deploy on carriers. Women couldn't be on carriers, so the squadron deploys, women stay back. Didn't want to do that. H-46s deploy on supply ships like AOEs, AFSs, AEs. So women weren't actually on AOEs at that time, but we would deploy 2 women at a time, and because it wasn't with the battle group, we would supply the battle group. I need to change that. Actually, AOEs did steam with the battle group, but women were allowed for the air debts. They had them going out. So anyway, that's why I chose H-46s. So I went to San Diego. That's where the training was for H-46s, Sea Night. That was 6 months.
And do you have experiences that stand out from that?
The 6 months of training? Probably first night flight. Going out to the ship at night, because your visual references, you totally rely on your visual references, especially trying to hold a steady hover over a ship, and all you have lights and what you can pick up from the ship. But it was challenging, but it was a good experience. They're preparing you because as a 46 pilot, when you deploy with battle group, that's your bread and butter. You're delivering bread, bullets, people amongst the battle group, and also we did a lot of external vertical replenishment. So on some ships, it's much faster to do vert rep. So we deploy on supply ships. We would deliver anything from dried potato flakes to bombs, milk, and it gets palletized on the flight deck. So on the supply ship, they palletize the supplies, put it in a big net. Somebody stands there with a hook like this, and under the helicopter, we have a cargo hook. So the helicopter, we can just fly in. The 46 was great because it didn't matter so much where the wind came from because it has 2 big rotors. So we would just come in over the deck, there's a crewman in the back who says, a pilot, when you're anywhere near that load, you can't see it. So there's one crewman in what's called a hell hole, which is where the hook is, and he's lying on his belly, looking down, and he calls you in, left 3, down 5, whatever. And then once he gets the hookup, he'll say, hookup man is cleared up. So you just bring it up, transition over the deck, and then go, lots of times to whatever ship you're doing vert rep with, to the receiving ship, drop the load, and then just back and forth. And we would do that all day. My longest flight was over 13 hours. We stopped to refuel, but it's a long day. That was during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Norfolk, Virginia. Went to my first squadron, which was HC-8 Dragon Whalers out of Norfolk, Virginia. And I reported there in January of '90, and then deployed in August, as I recall, for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Desert Shield at the time. And when you get to the squadron, the first qualification that you make as a new pilot out of training is helicopter second pilot. And there's a syllabus that you go through. And I believe, yes, I made H2P by the time I deployed, and then on deployment, you go through another training syllabus, and then you're qualified as an aircraft commander. And as an aircraft commander, you're responsible for the safe conduct of the flight. And you sign for the aircraft. So that's the distinguishing between the HTP and the aircraft commander.
And then you were overseas?
I was. We pretty much made a beeline for the Red Sea. I was supposed to go out on a different ship, an AFS, I believe, to the North Atlantic for 4 months. And then came along Desert Shield, Desert Storm. That got switched, and I deployed on an AOE, the USS Seattle. And I was deploying with another female pilot, so there would have been the two of us. We would have been the only women in the air detachment. And there's no women, ship's company. And AOE typically had about 400 guys, ship's company, meaning they're assigned to the ship. In the air detachment, we would go out with 6 pilots, 1 maintenance officer, and about 16 maintainers. We'd have 3 or 4 crewmen, 3, 4, or 5 crewmen who would go with us, air crewmen, maybe 6, and then the rest are maintainers. They're the guys who fix the helicopters. And like I said, I reported in January. In June of that year, we did a short detachment. So we went out on a ship for 2 weeks, and it's called workups. You're getting ready for deployment. You're doing training. And I was at that time it was the air detachment that was going to deploy. And when we were doing the offload, we have 2 helicopters doing the offload. So we're coming back in. Now we have to get all the supplies and people off. And the ship was stationed up in New Jersey, so it doesn't just come pierside. So we fly all our equipment and people off, and then the ship continues up the coast. So doing the offload, I was in the second aircraft to make a run in, and when we came back to the ship on the way back, when we switched up the tower, they were yelling that the first aircraft had crashed, had gone into the water. And at that time, they'd reported to us that they saw helmets floating, helmets in the water, so we thought maybe survivors. But when we got there, they were just helmets. So 3 out of the 4 crewmen helmets were on the water, and then just helicopter debris. But nobody survived that. And what come to find out what had happened is it had slung a blade, and it's a finely tuned machine, slung a blade that immediately out of balance. Aircraft split in half, and nobody survived. And they were coming into land to pick up 17 people to take them back. So anyway, that was the woman the female pilot was killed that I was going to be deploying with. And so afterward, my commanding officer gave me the choice to not go, to not deploy, because I would be the only woman on the detachment, only woman on the ship. And my thinking at the time was, well, a guy wouldn't have the choice, why should I? And so I said I'd go. And that was, it was interesting. The first 4 months were absolutely miserable. I mean, just completely miserable as the only woman on the detachment. But, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it ended up being a great experience. But working through, for the guys on the deck, both the pilots and the guys on the ship, how do we treat her? And there were issues then that, I mean, it was a learning experience, I would have to say, on both sides. But it ended up very positive. I felt like I had I was the most junior pilot of the 6, so it's just tradition. The junior pilot kind of gets dumped on, so that made it, you know. But by the end, I felt like I had 5 big brothers, and it was a great experience. It really was. They were good friends, good guys. So, and the ship's company as well. Yeah.
Where exactly did you go when you went overseas?
On that cruise, we went to Red Sea. We were deployed for 8 months. Spent the vast majority of the time in the Red Sea. We went to Haifa, Israel for a week to 10 days, and then we had on the way out. We also stopped in Sicily. On the way out, no, not on the way out. It must have been somewhere mid-cruise. We were in Sicily for a few days, and then in the Red Sea, we pull in and out of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, to resupply.
And what were your first impressions being in the Red Sea and conducting stuff?
The time, I mean, it was exciting. We went through the Suez Canal, and that was, and then we were building up. There were 3 carriers in the Red Sea at the time: the America, the Kennedy, and the Saratoga. And so, as the ammunition oiler, we were supplying 1 carrier every day coming alongside, because they would get fuel from the ship, and then we would transfer bombs and potato flakes, milk, whatever. So we did a lot of flying. Did a whole lot of flying. So.
And the week, did you say, in Israel?
Mm-hmm.
What were you doing then?
Sightseeing. The ships, you go on board for the ship to resupply, and then as the air crew, typically we didn't do a lot. We don't fly so much pier side, although we did have a flight down to Tel Aviv. I remember that, and we had to be very specific on exactly. We had reporting points, and if you were off altitude, outside of whatever your minute window was for where you were going to be down to Tel Aviv, you'd get escorted by an Israeli fighter. I remember that. But yeah. And that was the first time I had a chocolate croissant and a cappuccino at the Tel Aviv airport, and it was fantastic. Being a foodie, I remember that.
In Sicily?
Yeah.
What did you do there?
We worked with the Marines, and we did operations with the Marines. And we flew over, got to fly over Mount Etna. I have a wonderful picture of Mount Etna from an undisclosed, very high altitude for a helicopter, but it's a beautiful shot looking down into the crater. I have a poster up in my house now. But that was the reason we were there, is we spent 3 days working with the Marines.
What was that like working with them?
Oh, great. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's fun flying for us because we do things that we don't typically do. So, our bread and butter is flying around with the battle group, resupply.
And after the Red Sea, where did you go?
Home, and that was in March of '91, I believe. And then I was in the squadron, and then deployed again 9 months to a year later, something like that, and did a 5-month deployment to the Red Sea.
Same general.
Well, yes, except since it wasn't during war, it was less flying, more port visits, much more laid-back experience than the first deployment.
And after that?
Let's see, after that, I left the squadron in November of '92, and I went to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And
what were you going with?
Master's degree in astronautical engineering, and the way I chose that was I heard that Monterey was a nice place, so I looked for the longest program, and it was 2.5 years astronautical engineering. So that's how I chose that.
And was that covered by the military?
Oh yes. Yeah. Yes, that was good duty.
And after that, did you?
Oh, let's see. After that, I went. Oh, that was payback. I went to the Nimitz as a shooter. The Nimitz aircraft carrier. It was stationed up in Bremerton, Washington, and I called my detailer for orders out of PG school, and he made it quite clear that I would be going to a ship. So calling back when I decided, what ship, what job, what location, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to a ship. And now things have changed. Women were ship's company. This was the Combat Exclusion Law Act had opened up. It had gone away. It had opened up quite a bit for women. So now I could be stationed on an aircraft carrier. So I thought, well, if I'm going to be ship's company, deploy. Since I've not been on an aircraft carrier, I like to do that. And if I'm going to be on an aircraft carrier, there's no place to work but the flight deck. So I asked to be a shooter on the Nimitz, which was up in Bremerton, Washington, and I never lived in that part of the country. So I went up there, and I was a shooter's a catapult and a resting gear officer. So when you see the old videos, World War II, the guys on the flight deck launching the airplanes, that's what a shooter. That's a shooter. So I did that for 2 years, and I was also the hangar deck division officer as well.
So that 2 years you were staying in Washington?
Well, I was ship company on the Nimitz, and we deployed. We deployed to the Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf. We had one deployment for 6 months. We had several short deployments, workups down the coast of San Diego. And then right before I left, the ship was going on a around the world cruise to change home port to go into the yards in Norfolk, Virginia. And because we were short on shooters at that time, and we had some new shooters come on board that needed to be trained, I did 1 month of that cruise and flew off off the coast of Singapore, and then flew home from Singapore.
What was that like?
Oh, that was what part of that?
The cruise.
The 1 month cruise. That was good. I enjoyed it. That was, at the time, I knew when I left that 2 years, and that I could if I spent 30 years in the Navy and could only keep 2 years in the memory banks, that would be the 2 that I'd want. It was not fun, per se. I mean, Monterey was fun. I went kayaking and did all that. That was a lot of fun. But as far as rewarding, that was by far the most rewarding tour I've had. Working with the sailors, you know, the kids on the flight deck literally worked 21, 22 hours a day, literally, because the same kids who were operating the equipment during the day on the flight deck, launching and recovering aircraft, were the same kids that repair the equipment when flight ops have ended. And so, you know, I'd come up on the flight deck and ask, you know, petty officer so-and-so, how much sleep did you get last night? Oh man, I got good sleep. I got 4 hours. I wasn't joking. 4 hours was great. I mean, these kids would leave the flight deck. They would repair the equipment down below decks, and instead of taking time to walk back to their racks to sleep, they'd call it grabbing tile. They just slept right there in the workspace because 15 minutes was that was a chunk of sleep for them. And they do it day after day after day. Most dedicated, hard, and people don't realize that. And there was, you know, talking to the safety officer on the boat, there had never been a mishap tied to where a root cause was determined to be somebody didn't have enough sleep. Was the stated reason for you know, why we didn't plus up the guys. And you know, there's certainly space issues on the carrier as well. Yeah. But amazing kids. I love it. Absolutely great tour. Yeah.
Those deployments in the ocean, any memorable experiences for you?
In Persian Gulf? Yeah, it was hot. I remember that. I specifically remember it was hot. Yeah, it was, this was before, we pulled into Jebel Ali, we pulled into, Jebel Ali, and at that time, this was before. Now there's more security issues, and so MWR, the Morale, Welfare, and Rec, they would set up tours for sailors. So you know, you could sign up for a tour and go ride camels in the desert, out to Little Oasis. I went scuba diving in the Gulf of Oman. It was great. Yeah, really enjoyed that. After the minutes, I went to San Diego. I'd had orders to Kauai Island. I was a lieutenant, and I had orders to Kauai Island to fly C-12s. And at the very, very last minute, the Navy canceled those orders, and I never forgave them for that. But it worked out much better, actually. So I went to San Diego, and I was at the wing, the HC wing, which is the community that I was in, H-46s, H-53s. And I was a safety officer at the wing for about a year and a half. And during that time, I put in a package to transfer to the Aerospace Engineering Duty Officer Program. Because I think 2 reasons why I did that. One, my first deployment, the officer in charge, I just remember him talking about the program. That's the first time I'd ever heard of it, ABO, and because I had an engineering background, it sounded like a good way to go to combine my degree, and you also still have the opportunity to fly as an ABO. And so I put in a package and got selected to transfer to ABO. So after the 1.5 years in San Diego, my first assignment as an ABO was in Atsugi, Japan, as the operations officer for the Naval Air Pacific repair activity. I started as a production officer for the first year, or 6 months, and then completed up to the operation officer job. Great. NAPRA, Naval Air Pacific Repair Activity, was responsible for the depot level maintenance for all 4 deployed Navy Marine Corps aircraft. So we had guys who would, if a jet that was broken on an aircraft carrier anywhere, any aircraft that couldn't be fixed by either the squadron or intermediate level maintenance, we'd have guys who would travel within 24 hours and do assessment for repair. They could take digital pictures, send them back. Things have changed quite a bit at this point, but yeah. So it was that was a good job. I did a lot of traveling for that, and nights and weekends. My side job, I also got to fly C-12s with the station pilots in the city. So we flew to we fly people. The C-12 is a little 8-passenger plane, twin-engine beach Super King Air Beechcraft. We would fly to Korea and Japan, and down to Guam via Iwo Jima to refuel, and also Micronesian Islands. I went to, that was my first assignment with the Defense Contract Management Agency. I went to Lockheed Martin in Owego, New York, and I flew H-60 helicopters there. So Sikorsky built the H-60s, and then Lockheed Martin Owego did the systems integrations and the computer software upgrades, and Lockheed doesn't have any of their own contractor pilots to fly to check, any of the systems that they're upgrading. So that's what we did, and we would have one of their engineers, Lockheed Martin engineer, fly with us. So we go through a prescribed checklist and the issues we have. We have the engineer there, and it's documented. We land, they make changes, off we go. And that was great. And then once the system is ready for the military, for the government to buy it, and we would deliver the helicopters out to San Diego or Florida, wherever they were going.
Is it nice to just fly to fly?
It was very nice, and upstate New York is particularly nice because a lot of the airspace is uncontrolled, so it's it was really nice flying. And again, it was just a great group of folks there, the military and civilians at DCMA Owego, so that made it just a super experience. Yeah. I went to second tour with DCMA. I was the commander of DCMA Northrop Grumman, Bethpage, New York on Long Island. So similar program for DCMA, but no flying at that job. I know, it was sad. That was good, and that was during that tour I deployed to Iraq during the OIF. I was the deputy commander of DCMA Iraq for 6 months.
And what were your first impressions of Iraq?
Not favorable. Yeah, it was a good experience. You fly in on the C-130 into Baghdad and got your body armor on, and it's hot, but you're closer to the troops, and the job that DCMA had was oversight of the contract, the log cap contract. At that time, KBR was a contractor, and they provide base life support for all 4 deployed, all the military and civilian folks on the base, and it was they did a very good job. So you feel like you're making a real difference, direct and immediate. And it's I'm glad to have the experience, go over there and see what it's like for these folks. And they said that everybody's Iraq is different, and certainly that's true, because I tried to tell my family that obviously you're concerned when a loved one heads to Iraq, but I was on Camp Victory. The Camp Victory is a 23 square miles. So I think I had the safest job in Iraq. I went outside the wire maybe 2 or 3 times via helicopters to some of our outlying FOBs. But in Victory, the base, it's a well-established base. We had something like 50 or so forward operating bases. So soldiers out there, they didn't begin to have the infrastructure that we had at Camp Victory, with a gym and a nice dining facility, several of them. So much different experience than guys who were out and about in Humvees and combat soldiers, certainly. From Baghdad, I went to Airland in Norfolk, Virginia, and I started off. I worked there on the staff, Comnav Airland staff, as the H-60 class desk for 1 year, and during that time frame, I was selected for promotion to captain, and my boss was the director of engineering and material, and he had gotten pulled out for a commanding officer job with DCMA. So the last year, that was an 06 job, they put me in that job for a year, and then I got picked up for my current job here.
And that brings us pretty much to the end.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Did you ever see combat?
No, not in the, no.
Any peripheral combat?
In the Red Sea during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, there was a combat zone, but nobody was shooting at us, so no. And then in Iraq, clearly a combat zone in Baghdad, Camp Victory, but we would hear explosions. There's car bombs outside the base. Every now and then you get kind of knocked off your feet, but still, it's this was half a mile away. Can't imagine what it would be like to be anywhere near. And they would lob mortars into the base, so a few times you hear this, but it wasn't, I say kaboom, but it wasn't, a lot of times they didn't even explode. So, no, I can say probably I would have been higher threat driving in Long Island for the 6 months that I was deployed to Baghdad. But
Did you tell me that you were in
I was. That was my first deployment to Red Sea. We were doing a night vert rep, taking, in this case it was dry potato flakes from one ship to another. It was about 8 p.m. so we had a visual horizon, but it was dark. And I was at the, we came in, picked up the load, so I was at the controls coming in to pick up the load. Then you transfer, because the pilot coming in has a visibility, and then when you turn, the other pilot now has a better view of the ship. So he was the aircraft commander, I was the H-2P, second pilot. We pick up the load, we're transitioning, and we have a gauge, an NR gauge, for your rotor RPM. Normally it's like 100%. And we drooped. The pilot at the controls called it, first noticed the droop. I looked, we drooped down to 88%. And with an external load on, that's the first thing you want to do. So we jettisoned the load and climbed up to 500 feet. And in the meantime, right after we jettisoned the load, the crewman in the back, about the time that he was yelling that the engine was on fire and there was metal pieces, shrapnel flying in the back of the helicopter, we had 2 big engine T-lights, and one of them lit up, so we went through the engine fire procedures, and I remember pulling the T-handle that shuts off the fuel, and going through the procedures. We got out a mayday call, and when we were up at 500 feet, the second engine flamed out. there's an auxiliary power unit on the aircraft that it's used to start the engines, but it's also used when the engines are running properly, your generator's running, that provides a power lighting. But when your rotor RPM droops, which is going to be caused by your engine dropping offline, you can lose power. So it's just one of the things that, we do it over and over. So I'd started the APU, and we practiced a blind APU start. And I used to practice that when we land for fuel. I would close my eyes and practice starting the blind ape start. And that night I needed to use it because when we lost that second engine, generators dropped offline. Started and selected the APU, so we got our lighting back. So now you can see your instruments. And I remember calling out altitudes to the pilot at the controls. And my door, I jettisoned my door at about 50 feet. And up until this point, I had wondered if I would have enough strength to jettison the door. It's you have a handle, and there's a shear wire that holds that handle in place, and you just push it and out the door goes. And I remember talking to the maintenance. Our maintenance officer asked during the cruise, "Hey, when you guys do maintenance on that, can I try that?" But they do that at 2 in the morning, and I never got up to do it. So my first thought at 50 feet, jettison the door and watch it fall away, was easy. And that's, I'll never forget that, the sight of that door going. So when we hit the water, the impact, I hit the console, and I was just aware of the impact. And one of the first thoughts I had was I wondered if that was what it was like for my friend who'd been killed 8 months before, her experience. And I was underwater immediately. And come to find out, my sensation was the console coming up to meet me, but of course I'd hit the console, but you have an inertial reel on your seat, and it's like in your car, that when it's locked, it's locked. But in jettisoning fuel, after we first had we started drooping, I instinctively would have unlocked my inertial reel because I couldn't reach them otherwise to dump fuel. And then what was going on, I never relocked it. And at that point, it's supposed to act as an inertial reel, like your car. Mine failed, and come to find out several years later, 50% of the time they fail. So, yeah. But anyway, so upon impact, I was underwater immediately. My first thought was wondering if that's what it was like for Jane. And then we fly with a heat bottle, the helicopter emergency egress device, and basically it's a little scuba bottle. And they redesigned them, but at that time you had to make sure it was upright and then clear it for it to work. I had no idea which way was up. I was completely disoriented, and I thought about using my heat bottle, but then I thought I didn't want to let go. I knew my door was gone. I should back up. Upon impact, we go through training in the helo dunker that simulates. It's a big barrel in a pool with openings for windows, and you simulate a helicopter crash. And that training just came back immediately. And impact, the first thing I thought was to get a reference. So I had my reference, and then to wait until all violent motion stops, and I could feel the rotors still trying to turn. And when that ended, I got my reference. I let go of my belt. I knew my door was gone, but for some reason I couldn't find the door. I couldn't get out, and I wouldn't fly with gloves on because I wanted to, in case I was ever in the situation, I wanted to be able to feel what I was grabbing to. I couldn't get out. First thought was wondering if that's what it was like for my friend who was killed, and then thought about using the heat bottle, but not knowing which way was up, and knowing the door was gone, I didn't want to let go to get that thing out and deal with it and take one breath to clear it, because I'm obviously holding my breath. My next thought was I was about to find out what it felt like to drown. And then I remember just wondering how my dad was going to take it when he found out I was at the bottom of the Red Sea. And the next thing I knew, I went like this, and there was nothing around me, but I still had no idea where I was, if I was out of the helicopter, in the back of the helicopter. And in training, they tell you, if you don't know where you are, don't inflate your vest, because if you inflate and you're in the helicopter, you'll never get out because it's so buoyant. So I just pulled and waited, and then my head broke the surface of the water, which is an instant I will never forget. And the first thing I saw was the aircraft commander at a distance, and I saw a strobe light going on his helmet, so he'd already got out, found a strobe light, turned it on, put it on, and the next thing was a flare. He'd shot off a flare, and my crew chief had gotten out, and he was right there. And so here's a guy who'd gone through the crash himself, and he was immediately in rescue swimmer mode, asking me how I was. And then our second crewman, he did not get out of the helicopter. And come to find out, after the fact, that the first crash that I mentioned, when my friend was killed, this was 8 months before, what had come out of that was, it looked like the two crewmen in the back who were killed may have tried to egress, but that they broke through the canvas seat, and somebody supposed that maybe they didn't get out because they were trapped in that seat. Our crewman apparently had decided that if he ever went down on a helicopter, he would not be in the seat. So he was down on one knee in the center. This is what our crew chief told us. One knee in the center, holding on, and our crew didn't know if he'd had his gunner's belt clipped in or not. And the last time our crew chief saw him was after impact. The helicopter immediately flooded, and the crew chief was right at the emergency door, and our other crewman, his head was down after impact, and he didn't know if he was alive trying to swim out or if he was unconscious or what, but he said he was just out of his reach. And of course the water was taking him back, and there's no way our crew chief could have helped him at that point. We were doing like I had mentioned, and the other ship had seen us go in the water and immediately did an emergency breakaway, put a boat in the water, and we were probably picked up. It was only about 30 minutes before we were picked up.
Did you sustain injuries?
Bumps and bruises. One of my eyes, I couldn't see. I couldn't see. Like if I were to close one eye and look at you, all I saw was as if somebody took a flash. You know how you get that? But that's all I could see. So I couldn't see anything but light on the kind of on the outside. And I was a young lieutenant pilot. I hadn't been in the squadron even a year. So I talked to my buddies, my other pilot friend, the guys, what should I do? Because you have this was about a month before we came home. So this was at the end of the deployment. Should I tell the flight surgeon? Because you have a flight physical whenever you're involved in a mishap, and it was kind of split between, well, it might be good if you saw out of your eye, but on the other hand, they might down you from flying. So I decided I wasn't going to mention this. So stupid, I know. But so I had to do an eye test, right? And I'm looking in to read the letters, and he was on the other side of the room. So I read them with my good eye, and then he's paying no attention whatsoever. Asked me to read my right eye. Well, it turns out if you kind of look around, which I could do with my other eye, I could see perfectly. And so I looked, memorized them, and went back and told them what it was, and that was the best vision I ever had in my right eye. And then after a few days, I got my vision back. And we had been scheduled for a port visit immediately after the crash anyway, which the ship went ahead and executed. So by the time I flew again, I had my vision back in my eye.
Good, otherwise
Yeah.
you would have come to a premature stop.
Oh yeah.
So that was one casualty.
Mm-hmm.
The other crew member. casualties you were
In my, on that deployment, no.
across?
Mm-mm. Well, we had 8 months before we had a crash, we lost 4 people. So in my tour, in my squadron, those were the only 2 mishaps. But that's an exceedingly high number of mishaps in 2-year period, 3-year period.
Can you tell me about any other memorable experiences from any part of the show?
Wow, I'm sure I can. Well, along the lines of mishaps, when I was starting on the flight deck of the aircraft carrier, we had an F-14 come in one time, and he's coming to land, and the hook catches the pennant, the cross-deck pennant, and the way that works is you have the cross-deck pennant, and then you have what are called turnbuckles. So cross-deck pennant, turnbuckles, and then the wire goes down below in the ship, and it's so that when aircraft catches that wire and pulls it out, it's a big cylinder that basically goes into water, and that's how the thing stops. Old technology. Anyway, one of the turnbuckles failed when the F-14 came in, and it failed on both ends, and the turnbuckle it slung it forward on the ship. It went through an S-3 aircraft and killed a guy who was standing on the other side. And that's that cross-deck pennant. When they fail, it whips across the deck, and it knocked a bunch of folks down, but fortunately nobody was seriously injured from that.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Not specifically war related. No.
Okay, we're going to go over some quality of life in the military questions. How did you stay in touch with family?
First cruise, this was in 1990, letters, the old-fashioned snail mail. So you write letters and you number them because you didn't always get the first letter before the 5th one. And then when we pulled into port, making phone calls home. But the first cruise we could go, easily a month, between port visits. And also, Mars operators. So on the ship when we were deployed, guys who worked the radios, for the ship, they could also have basically a ham radio station. And so they would make calls, this is, whatever, and they would be looking for Mars operators, ham radio operators back in the States who would relay calls. And these guys did this all on a volunteer basis. And so there was one in particular at Rhode Island, Lynn Richardson, who was up all the time, seemed like. And so we would contact her and give whatever phone number. She'd make the call from the States. And I can't remember how we, if that was if we used our phone cards or exactly. I think AT&T, they may have done some of those free. I just don't remember that detail. But so we communicated with them through the ham operators a lot, and sometimes you'd have a really good signal, and other times it would get kind of tinny and drawn out, and you couldn't understand because of where the ship was. But this gal, didn't know it right away, but after several months, she was blind. She was the volunteer operator out of, which is for 8 months. She was always up.
Nice that they worked that out.
Oh yeah, yep.
And what was
Okay. The
You
food,
said you were a foodie, so I knew you'd like.
yes,
Questions.
the food on the Seattle was, nothing right, the last time you had a green salad was probably the day you left port, and then they were kind of white. I'd have Raisin Bran every morning. This was a memorable experience. Raisin Bran, open the little box, put in the milk, eat it. Well, one day, for some reason, I hesitated between putting the milk in and eating. Now I looked, and there were these little floaty things with feet. Yeah, so dumped that one out, put the next one in, and looked before the milk went in, and they started crawling up the sides of the bowl. So, no, food was, I would say, not good on that ship. But when I was on the aircraft carrier, it was great. The food was very good. No complaints. Salad bar was nice. Boy, some of the best pizza. We had a great bake shop on the Nimitz, so the bread and the pizza was really good, and a lot of good variety.
Did you feel pressure or stress?
Sure.
How did you deal with that?
Run. Work out. Yeah. Same as everybody else.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. From time to time. Yeah.
Is there anything that you did for good luck?
For good luck, well, along the superstition line, I would always put my left boot on first. I don't know why. Flight boot. I have no idea when or why I started doing that, but that's the only thing I can remember.
Did you happen?
And my left flight glove.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Did you happen to catch anyone else doing something?
No, not that I can remember.
How did people entertain themselves?
Oh wow. It's a long span. You're talking 24 years, so it's changed how people entertain themselves. But well, reading books, reading. First long cruise, because your options were very limited at that point, because we didn't have computers, email, anything like that. Mm-hmm. So we would read, and we did a lot of flying then. So, and then on the Nimitz we had and also running on both ships. There was an area where you could. On Nimitz it was a treadmill and a small some weightlifting equipment on the forecastle. And then on the Seattle, it's a big cargo ship, so you could run around the cargo hold. So a lot of working out. And then, of course, these days, you can do email, and I don't know what other access they have, but it's quite a lot different than it was.
Yeah. Were there entertainers?
On the ship, no. Well, no, other than my fellow pilots. No. In Baghdad, Charlie Daniels, there were several. Yeah, when I was there, Charlie Daniels was there, and then a country singer, I don't remember his name, but Charlie Daniels was fantastic. He, after the show, not just the performance, but after the show, he stayed until the last soldier, sailor, airman, marine that wanted an autograph had it. Big line out the door, and so I have called a boonie hat, when the part of the uniform, optional part, that his band signed my hat, and I have a picture of Charlie Daniels and a couple of the band members, and that was nice. That was real, yeah, it was.
Did you get to go on leave at all?
Not out of Baghdad, because I was on a short deployment. It's like 5.5 months, I think, really in country. And if you're there 9 months or a year, you get 2 weeks R&R in the middle. And then on the ship's deployment, when I was in Haifa, my then boyfriend flew out, and we traveled around Israel for about a week. I rented a car and drove down to Tel Aviv and met him, and then we drove all over Israel. there's thousands, but they're not necessarily coming to mind right now.
Doug had the same problem. He said, I wish you would have told me about this one.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. I've got 100 sea stories, at least.
Well, I will come back to it at the end if you think of anything.
Okay.
Related question, if you remember, were there any pranks that you played on each other?
Oh yeah, yeah. Things you. I don't know if you could do them now or not. But I remember my first cruise. Actually, it wasn't the first. It was the workup when we had the crash, where 4 people were killed. Prior to the crash, the guy, they were typically for like new pilots. So myself and another friend of mine, Bob, we were the brand new pilots. So they were going to come get us, and they would just like tie you down to the flight deck and, you know, hose you off or dump whatever on you they want, you know. Well, my friend who was killed, she was like, no, you can't have her. So they grabbed her, even though she was a senior pilot, and hog-tied her. But she was from Minnesota, had a, you know, great sense of humor. They do things like that. That's before, you know, email and computers and for entertainment. Yeah.
What did you think of your fellow soldiers and your security?
Nothing but respect.
Did you keep a personal diary at all?
No. My mother told me I should, and she was absolutely right. So my diary consists of emails or letters back and forth for the most part.
So you did do email later on?
Later on. When I was on the Nimitz, then the way it would work is you could, as a hangar deck divo, I had a computer, and then I let all my guys have access scheduled, and then you could type an email, and we would save them all onto a disk, a little 3.5-inch disk, and at the end of the day, take it to wherever we took it, and then they would get mailed off, or sent out, not mailed off. Yeah.
So you're still serving, so I can't ask you about the last day of service. But I can ask you about coming back to the States for the last time. How did it feel to be back?
From Baghdad? Oh, that was fantastic. And returning from a deployment is just a great feeling from a long deployment, because you're very confined. And coming back from Baghdad, and my dad was there in Fort Benning, and my sister came down as well. Yeah, just super. Great to be back.
Did you make any close friendships in the service?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Several. Unfortunately, my best friend was killed in a car accident about 8 years ago from flight school and beyond. But yeah, you have, when you serve an environment like that, like I said, from back in AOCS, it's all for one for all. So you develop very close relationships. And even though some of these folks I haven't seen for years, I feel like we could just pick up right where we left off and keep in touch with emails and get together occasionally.
Have you maintained as much as you could those friendships?
Yes. Yeah.
Have you joined any veterans organizations?
Yes, VFW, lifetime member. My father gave that to me.
Are you active? Do you go to the events?
I did when I was in Owego, New York, which is when I originally signed up, but not since then.
you as a career, and that's here.
Well, what I intend to go on to do, since I'm going to retire in about a year, is go to culinary art school.
Really?
Yes. That's my plan.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Absolutely. Sure. I mean, you couldn't possibly spend any time probably in the military, but certainly not a 25-year career and have that not. Yeah, I have an insider's view. You know, when I talked about the kids on the aircraft carrier, you wouldn't know that. And I met a lot of people, especially living in upstate New York, who had no concept of what it was like to be in the military. They were in the military, no one in their family was in the military, they didn't know anyone who'd ever served in the military. So I have a much, obviously, greater appreciation for the military lifestyle. And, you know, you see kids, enlisted guys, when I was in San Diego, talking to a second-class petty officer, a guy who's been in the Navy maybe over, in his case, over 10 years. He's married, has 2 kids, he qualified for food stamps. This is a guy who will, you know, deploys and works 18-hour days. So, I have a much greater appreciation and respect for the military, I think, than certainly if I had never served.
Similar question. How did your service and your experiences affect your life?
How did it affect my life? It's a huge question. You know, it was, I was a kid who wanted to go in the Peace Corps, and I still do. I still, every so often, I go to their website and see, you know, what's available, and I attended an info session about a year ago. So it hasn't certainly changed that inclination. But, you know, in the military, you're afforded a lot of opportunities that you just, at least for me, never would have had. I couldn't afford to have gotten a private pilot's license, or to be a pilot, or to be sent to 2.5 years when my duty was to go to class and get a master's degree. Traveled around the world. I had the opportunity to live in Japan for 2 years, and that's just a wonderful experience to live in another country, because the world view from that location is certainly different than it is from the United States. So I've had just a great base of experience that I wouldn't have had, and going through an experience like AOCS or flight school, you come out of that, your self-confidence is going to be significantly different from the 22-year-old kid that graduated from college and might have gone back home or gotten a desk job somewhere. Because there was, in flight school, I can remember thinking, looking up and seeing the formation flights come in, and how am I going to do that, And then you overcome it. So there are many in the military, challenges laid out, and you overcome them, challenge them. So your confidence, certainly, I probably have significantly more confidence than I would have had I taken a more ordinary job as opposed to going in the military.
Is there, before I go back, did you happen to recall any other unusual or funny incidents?
We'd probably have to turn the camera off and let me think for that one. But for the ones that I could repeat.
Screen them all.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we have not covered?
No, it's been, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been able to serve. Absolutely. And it's hard on the families. I know you certainly heard that before. But my first cruise I had, because of the war, I had 5-day notice that I was going to deploy, and in my case, I was single, I was a young lieutenant. I don't know what I would have done without my dad. I mean, I just basically signed power of attorney, everything over to him. I had checks. You know, this is before the pay your bill online time. This was back in 1990. I just signed check after blank checks, and my dad took care of all my bills. Yeah, and my landlord at the time was fantastic, so that helped a lot too. But you know, Dad took care of the apartment, paid all my bills. He took way better records than I ever did. So I came back and he gave me the whole packet of. So yeah.
It must have been strange to just drop your life.
Yes, but you know, at the time I was 26, something like that, 25. So it's easier then. And then, and now when I went to Baghdad, I had a couple months, which is eternity relative to 5 days. Yeah, so it's a big load on the families, no doubt, and especially couples with children. Yeah, that's I can't imagine leaving a child. It's hard enough to leave my cats.
All of that having been said, I would like to thank you for your service and your time.
Thank you.